Some of the scariest stories are the ones where nothing supernatural happened. No ghosts. No demons. No unexplainable forces. Just a person who decided you were worth watching, and then did something about it. Tonight, I have one story. A single account sent in by a viewer. It is one of the most disturbing true stories I have ever received. And it is the kind of true horror story that will change how you look at the space around you. The man who watched from inside. At the time this happened, I was 26 years old and I had just moved into my first apartment alone. Not the first place I had ever rented. I'd had roommates before. A college dorm my freshman year, then a house with 3 other guys, then a 2-bedroom with a friend from work for about 18 months. But this was the first place that was genuinely, entirely mine. No one else on the lease. No shared bathroom schedule. No somebody else's dishes in the sink. No explaining when I'd be home. It was a second-floor unit in a 4-plex in a mid-sized city in Ohio. One of those old brick buildings from maybe the 1940s that has been divided up and reconfigured so many times over the decades that the original floor plan makes almost no sense anymore. My unit had a front door that opened into a narrow hallway. The kitchen and living area were together at the back. The bedroom was a converted sitting room with a closet that someone had clearly added later, because it sat slightly off-center from everything else in the room, like it had been slotted in as an afterthought, which I would eventually learn was exactly what had happened, though not in the way I understood at first. I loved that apartment. I want to make that clear. Before everything else I'm going to tell you, I want you to understand that when I moved in, I was genuinely happy there. I painted the kitchen wall a dark green that I'd been wanting to try. I found a second-hand couch that was perfect and got it up the stairs with help from 2 neighbors. I hung my books up on shelves I built myself. I had a little routine. Coffee in the morning, work from the kitchen table, a walk in the evening. Simple life. Good life. The kind of ordinary, unremarkable life that sounds boring when you describe it but feels rich when you're inside it. I was working as a claims adjuster for an insurance company. Mostly remote by that point. I'd go into the office 2 or 3 times a week, but the rest of the time I was home. Which meant I spent a lot of time in that apartment. A lot of time alone in that space. I knew it thoroughly. Every creak in the floor and which foot pressure made it. Every draft from which window. The specific pipe sound before the upstairs neighbor started the shower. The way the kitchen light buzzed slightly when the refrigerator ran at the same time. Small things. The kind of intimate knowledge you only develop about a space you occupy alone. I thought I knew everything about that place. I did not. My neighbor directly below me was a man named Gerald. Mid-60s, retired, friendly enough in the way people are when they're trying to be neighborly without actually wanting to be friends. We'd wave in the parking lot. We'd nod in the hallway. He told me once, the first week I moved in, that he was glad to have a quiet neighbor above him. Said the guy before me had paced at night. Back and forth, back and forth. Said he could map the route just from the sound. The unit directly across the hall from mine was empty for most of my first 4 months. There was a printed page taped inside the front window with a phone number and the property management company name. I walked past it every day going in and out. It had that specific stillness of an unoccupied space, the feeling you get from a room where the air hasn't been moved in a while. Then sometime around my 5th month someone moved in. I noticed the page was gone from the window. I saw boxes in the hallway one afternoon when I was coming home. A man moving things. I gave him a nod, the same nod Gerald had given me. He nodded back. He was maybe late 30s, average height, nothing that would make you look twice. We exchanged the bare minimum of words over the following weeks. A hello here and there. Once he asked me if the parking was assigned and I told him what I knew, which wasn't much. The couple in the 4th unit, the ground floor back, I barely saw at all. They kept different hours. I could hear one of them sometimes coming in very late. One of them drove a white pickup with a cracked left taillight. That's everything I knew about them, and it's still everything I know. Normal building. Normal people. Normal life. I was 7 months into living there when I first noticed something wrong. I want to walk through it carefully because I've thought about the sequence a lot. The order matters. The order is what kept me from understanding what was happening until much later than I should have. The first thing I noticed was a smell. This was November. The weather had turned and I was running the heat for the first time. One evening I came home from a long day at the office. This was one of my in-person days, and when I opened my front door there was something in the air. Not a bad smell, exactly. More like a different smell. My apartment had a smell I'd come to know without consciously noticing it. Coffee and whatever I'd cooked recently, and the warm dusty note that old radiators give off. And sometimes, faintly, Gerald's cigarettes coming up through the floor vents. I knew all of those. This was not those. It was a human smell. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the air in a room where someone had been sitting for a long time. Warm and close and faintly stale. The kind of smell that accumulates in a space with another person in it. I opened the windows for a few minutes. I told myself it was the building. Old buildings have weird ventilation. Things travel through old walls. I cooked dinner. The smell faded. Or I stopped noticing it. I did not think about it again for more than a week. The second thing was the shoes. My bedroom closet was not large. Maybe 5 feet wide and 4 feet deep. One hanging rod. One shelf above it. The floor was just floor. I kept my shoes there in a rough line, pairs more or less together, not organized but consistent. I had a system the way you have a system without calling it that. Work shoes on the right, casual shoes in the middle, a pair of boots on the left. It was just how they landed, and I always put them back roughly the same way. One morning, I went into the closet to get my work shoes and I stopped. The shoes were not quite right. Not moved dramatically. Not scattered. Just shifted. Subtly rearranged. One sneaker was turned inward when it was always turned outward. The boots were pushed slightly toward the center when I kept them on the left. The work shoes were further from the wall than I remembered. I stood in the closet doorway and looked at my shoes for probably 2 minutes. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to find the normal explanation before it allows itself to consider the abnormal one. I'd kicked them in the night. I'd gone in half asleep. I had rearranged them and forgotten. I'd been in a hurry the previous morning. I picked an explanation. I went to work. I did not think about it again. And this is the part one come back to most, when I'm being honest with myself. Not just for this incident, but for every single one that followed. My brain's capacity for finding a normal explanation was not a bug. It was doing exactly what brains are supposed to do. We are wired to prefer the mundane answer. It protects us from anxiety. It keeps us functional. What it also does, sometimes, is keep us from acting when we should. December. I decorated a little. Small tree on the kitchen counter. A wreath on the front door. I put some candles on the windowsill that I never lit because I kept forgetting to buy a lighter. The holidays that year were just me. My parents were visiting my sister in Arizona and I declined to join, partly because of the expense and partly because I'd spent the previous 2 holidays with that side of the family and wanted something different. I told myself I was fine with it. I think I was. The solitude of that apartment had started to feel like mine, like something I'd built rather than something that had happened to me by default. I cooked myself a full Christmas Eve dinner. I watched movies until 2 in the morning. I slept until 10 the next day. But December was also when the apartment started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't dismiss as quickly. By then I was working from home almost every day. Winter. Low motivation to drive in. My world was very small. Just me and the laptop and the radiator ticking and Gerald's television below me, faint and murmuring like conversation in another room. I was in that space for long hours. I was quiet in it. I knew it sounds the way you know someone's breathing when you've slept next to them long enough. Which is why the knock stopped me cold. It was a Wednesday afternoon, maybe 2 or 3 o'clock. I was at the kitchen table on a call with a headset, walking through claim documentation, completely ordinary work afternoon. And from the direction of my bedroom came a single knock. Not a bang. Not a crash. A knock. Deliberate. Like one set of knuckles on a hollow interior door. Clear enough to cut through my headset. I took the headset off and said nothing to the person on the other end for what must have been a strange few seconds. Silence. Just the radiator. Just my own breathing. I excused myself from the call, set the headset down, and walked to my bedroom. Empty. Everything where I had left it. Window closed. Nothing on the floor. The closet door was shut, latched with the hook I'd started using. I stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly. Nothing. Building settling, I told myself. Gerald knocking on something. A pipe. A neighbor above me on the 3rd floor, though I'd never heard much from up there. I went back to work. That same week the closet door started opening. I always kept it shut. I know that's a particular thing, not everyone cares, but I have always disliked sleeping with the closet open. It's not a phobia. It's just a preference. The door was always shut when I went to sleep and always shut when I woke up. 3 nights in a row I woke up and it was open. Not cracked. Fully open. Standing open the way it would if you'd left it that way, not the way it would if it had drifted due to a draft. There was nothing to drift it. The floor was level. The hinges were tight. It just stood open. I examined the latch. It was a small hook and eye, originally installed to keep the door from swinging if the bedroom window was left open. Simple mechanism. I started using it every night, hooking it shut before I turned off the light. The first night I did that, I woke up at 3 in the morning to a sound inside the closet. A slow, dry sound, like fabric moving against fabric. I lay there completely still, breathing as shallowly as I could manage. The sound was very faint, almost below the threshold of hearing, but it was there, consistent. A slow shifting, like clothes moving against each other on a rod. Then the heat kicked on. The vent in the closet floor released a low rush of warm air. And I told myself the heat had moved my clothes. I told myself that, consistently, for the next 3 weeks. By January, I was sleeping badly. Not because of nightmares. Not because I lay awake anxious. More like the sleep itself was thin. I'd go under and then surface, fully, multiple times in a night. That abrupt, full-body kind of waking up. Eyes open. Heart going. The sense of having heard something or felt something, though I could never identify what. Every time I woke like that, the room was as I'd left it. The closet door latched. The window shut. The doorway to the hall empty. I'd lie back down. I'd go under again. And then I'd surface again. I started leaving a glass of water on my nightstand. I'd never done that before. I'm not sure exactly why I started. Dry throat from the heat maybe. Some unconscious need to have something to do in those middle-of-the-night moments. Something to reach for that would ground me. In mid-January, on a Saturday night, I woke up at about 2 in the morning and reached for the glass. It wasn't there. I sat up and looked at the nightstand. The ring of condensation the glass had left was clearly visible. The glass had been there. It was not there now. I got out of bed and checked the floor. Not there. I checked the bathroom. Not there. I went to the kitchen. It was on the kitchen counter. Empty. Rinsed. Clean enough that there was no water ring inside it. I stood in my kitchen at 2 in the morning holding that glass, and I tried to make myself believe that I had sleepwalked. I had never sleepwalked before in my life. I had no history of it. I asked my mother later casually whether I'd ever done it as a child. She said no, never. Why are you asking? I said I'd read an article. I put the glass back on the counter. I went back to bed. I lay there until it got light outside. I did not sleep. After the glass, something shifted in how I was moving through the apartment. I don't mean I became dramatic about it. I didn't bolt extra locks. I didn't call anyone. I didn't say a word to anyone. What I did was quieter than that. I started checking things. Not obsessively. Not in a way I would have called checking. More like I started noticing. I noticed where I'd left things and checked whether they'd moved. I noticed the positions of things on my desk, my nightstand, my kitchen counter. A mild version of a game I told myself I wasn't playing. Looking for a pattern I told myself wasn't there. My sleep got worse. I started working from bed because I wanted my back to the wall and the doorway visible. I started leaving the bathroom light on. I started checking under the bed before I got in, something I hadn't done since I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. I was aware of the absurdity of this. I did it anyway. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't tell anyone. Because saying it out loud would mean admitting that I believed something was wrong, and I couldn't do that yet. Believing it would require acting on it. Acting on it would require knowing what I was acting on. And what was I going to say? My shoes moved. My closet door opens. I woke up and my water glass was in the kitchen. People rationalize. That's not weakness. That's just what people do. In February, I found a handprint on my bathroom mirror. This was the thing I couldn't rationalize. Or not for long, anyway. I had cleaned that mirror about 4 days before. I know because I was on the phone with my mother and I was absent-mindedly cleaning while we talked, which was a habit of mine. I used the blue spray cleaner and a paper towel. I did the whole mirror. Clear glass when I was done. No smudges. I would have noticed a handprint because I'd been looking straight at the glass. 4 days later, I went in to brush my teeth before bed. I stopped in the doorway. There was a handprint in the center of the mirror. Left hand. Palm flat against the glass. 4 fingers. No thumb visible. The hand had been pressed palm forward. The print was at almost exactly my eye level. The hand was maybe slightly larger than mine, though it was hard to judge from the print alone. The ridge lines in the skin were clear enough to see. It had been pressed deliberately, held there. I stood in the doorway and looked at it. My first instinct was to go over and look closer. My second instinct, which overrode the first, was to not move, to not step into that bathroom, to just stand where I was. I took my phone out of my pocket and took a photo of the mirror. Then I went to my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat against the wall with the lamp on, and every few hours I'd get up and walk the apartment and check the front door and the windows and come back and sit down. I did that until it was fully light outside. The next morning, I called my landlord. His name was Dale. I told him I believed someone had been inside my apartment. I told him about the handprint. He was skeptical in the way that landlords are when they think a tenant is about to cause them a problem. He said the building was locked, he was the only one with a master key besides the management company, and was anything taken. I said nothing was taken that I could identify. He said maybe I should call the police if I was seriously concerned. I called the non-emergency line. An officer came and walked the apartment with me. He took the photo on his department phone. He checked the windows for signs of forced entry. He checked the front door. He found nothing. He told me to make sure the windows were locked and asked if I had any security cameras. I didn't. He said to call back if there was any escalation. He wrote something in his notebook. He left. After he left, I stood in the middle of my living room and made a decision. I was going to stay. Because I still did not have evidence of anything definitive. Because I could still, with effort, construct a story where the handprint was mine and I'd forgotten or missed it when I cleaned. Because I had a lease and because leaving felt like overreacting. I was going to stay and I was going to watch more carefully and see if it stopped. It stopped. For about 10 days, nothing happened. The closet door stayed latched. The glass stayed on the nightstand. I slept badly, but I slept. I started to wonder if the officer's visit had spooked someone. I started to breathe a little easier. That was the last time I breathed easy in that apartment. In early March, I found the hole. I want to stay here for a moment because this is the part that undoes me when I tell it, even now. Even years removed. I need to go through it carefully. I was reorganizing my bedroom closet. A quiet Sunday. I had decided to put the seasonal clothes in storage bins and clear some space. I was moving things around, shifting shoes to get better access to the back of the floor. My closet, as I said, sat slightly off-center in the room. I had chalked this up to the renovations over the years. Old buildings get sectioned and resectioned. Things don't always line up. But being inside the closet, down on my hands and knees to reach the back corner, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. The back wall had a seam near the floor. Not a crack. Not settling damage. A seam. A straight, clean seam where two pieces of material met. It ran horizontally across the lower half of the wall, about 18 inches up, and vertically at each side. Like a panel. Like a section of wall that had been installed separately. I sat back on my heels. I looked at the seam for a long time. Then I pressed my hand flat against the panel and pushed. The panel moved. It swung inward, away from me. On what I could see was a crude hinge at the top. A piece of heavy leather strap, nailed through the panel into a wood frame. Not a hinge you'd buy at a hardware store. Something improvised. Something put together by someone who knew it didn't need to last, just needed to work. The panel swung in and behind it was dark. Not just dark like a closet. Dark like a space with no light source at all. And from that dark came a smell. That same smell. The one from November. The warm, human, accumulated smell of a person in an enclosed space for a long time. I did not go in. I did not shine a light in. I stood up very slowly, stepped back out of the closet, walked to my bedroom doorway, and kept walking. Into the hall. Into the living room. I grabbed my keys and my phone from the kitchen counter and I walked out my front door without closing it behind me. I called Rachel from the parking lot. I told her everything. Standing next to my car in the cold, February coat, no shoes on because I'd left them by the bed. I went through it in order. The smell, the shoes, the closet door, the water glass, the handprint, the panel. She was very quiet through all of it. Then she said, "Leave right now and do not go back inside." I said I was already outside. She said, "Call 911 and tell them you think someone might still be in your apartment." I did. The dispatcher took the call seriously. 2 officers came within about 8 minutes. I walked them to the closet and showed them the panel. They called for backup. While we waited, a 3rd officer arrived. They went in with flashlights, hands on their weapons. I stood in the hall. I'm going to tell you what they found. The space behind the panel was a crawl corridor, a remnant of the original building structure, from before the units were divided. When the building had been converted from a single-family home or a commercial space, no one ever told me the exact original use. The contractor had built out the interior walls and at some point created this corridor, either as an access space for utilities or simply as the gap between the old wall and the new one. It wasn't on any drawing Dale had. It wasn't referenced in any permit on record with the city. It had just been closed off and forgotten. Except it hadn't been closed off completely. The corridor ran behind 2 of the 4 units. Mine and the unit across the hall. The empty unit. The one where my former neighbor had lived. In the corridor they found a sleeping bag. Folded. The kind you get at a sporting goods store, mid-range, meant for camping. It had been used. It had been folded deliberately, neatly, the way you fold something you plan to use again. 3 plastic bags from a grocery store. 2 were empty. 1 contained granola bars and 2 sealed packs of crackers. A water bottle. Metal. The kind with a twist cap. Almost empty. A phone charger. The cable had been run from the charging block to an outlet, an old junction box in the wall that had apparently still been live. There was a scuff mark on the junction box where the cover had been pried off and replaced multiple times. A small, battery-powered lantern. The kind with a handle. The batteries were almost dead when they found it. A notebook. I was not allowed to read the notebook. The detective who took the lead on the scene told me it was evidence and it needed to go through the proper process before she could share any of it with me. Her name was Marcus. Just Marcus. She said everyone called her that and I should too. She sat with me in the parking lot after and told me, carefully, what she could. The notebook contained entries. Dated entries. Some were just dates and times. Some were longer. The longer ones described me. What I was wearing. What I was eating. What I was doing in the apartment. Phone calls she could infer I was having based on my behavior. My schedule, reconstructed over weeks. When I left. When I came home. When I turned the lights off. When I turned them on again in the middle of the night. There were holes in the closet wall. Below the hanging clothes, near the baseboard, where the clothes pooled at the bottom. You wouldn't see them unless you were looking for them. Small holes, maybe the diameter of a finger, angled upward. From his side, they gave him a sight line into the room. Not all of it. Not enough to see the entire space. But enough. The first entry was dated November. The smell in November. He had been in there since November. The man across the hall. The one who had moved out. The lease had ended. He had not renewed. Dale had walked the unit with him on the last day. The unit was empty. The key had been returned. But sometime in the weeks between his departure and Dale showing the unit again, he had gotten back in. Through the empty unit's front door. How he got in without a key was investigated and never fully resolved. The lock on that unit was a basic cylinder lock, and the door had some play in the frame. The theory was that he had made a key during his tenancy and kept it. Or that he was skilled enough to get in without one. There was no evidence of the door being forced. He had gone into the unit. He had found the crawl corridor, either because he had discovered it during his tenancy or because he had known about it before he rented. Again, this was never resolved. He had gone into the corridor and he had not come out. Or rather, he had come out. Just not the way anyone expected. He had come out through the panel in my closet. The panel had been there before I moved in. The hinge had been installed before I moved in. He had done that work, or someone had done it on his behalf, while he was still my legal neighbor. While he was still in that unit, with a reason to be in the building, with enough time to do it without anyone noticing. The detective told me he had what appeared to be a fixation. This was the word she used. A fixation disorder, she said, which was confirmed later when his history was compiled. He had done something similar before. Not this exactly. Not a crawl space. But adjacent things. Staying in places he wasn't supposed to. Watching people he had decided to watch. He had a prior trespassing charge in another state from several years before. He had been in a treatment facility. He had been out for a while and then he had found my building and rented a unit and found a corridor and decided I was worth watching. I don't know why me. I've asked Marcus this, not just once. I've asked her every version of this question I can think of. She's been honest with me, she doesn't know either. The notebook entries don't explain it. They document. They observe. They do not explain. There's nothing in them that identifies a reason or a goal or an endgame. He had been watching me for somewhere between 6 and 9 weeks based on the entries. Marcus said probably 6. There were entries from before November that were sparser, she said, and she thought those might have been while he was still establishing himself in the corridor. Getting comfortable. Setting up. Getting comfortable. He had been in my kitchen. He had taken the glass of water and rinsed it and put it on the counter, which she said might have been a way of testing how I would respond, or might have just been a personal habit. He had pressed his hand against my bathroom mirror. She didn't explain that one to me, and I didn't ask. She told me his access had appeared to be mostly observational. I have thought about the word mostly every single day since she said it. He was arrested 2 days after the discovery. He had been staying somewhere else by then, a motel about 20 minutes away. The motel came up in the investigation when they reviewed his financial records. He had been dividing his time. The corridor for a while, the motel for a while, back and forth. He was 39 years old. He looked, in the photo Marcus showed me, exactly like someone you wouldn't think twice about. That's not a cliché. That's the truth. Average height. Average face. The kind of person you pass in a grocery store and your eyes move on before you've fully registered them. He pled guilty to 2 of the charges. I was not required to testify. I'm glad for that, even if part of me wanted to be in that room. I found out the sentencing later through the case records, which are public. I'm not going to say it here. I never went back to the apartment. Rachel drove me to get my things, and I sat in her car in the parking lot while a friend went up and brought down the boxes. I could not make myself go back in there. I still don't fully understand if that was rational or not. The man was in custody. The space had been found and sealed. There was nothing left in the corridor. The apartment was just an apartment again. But I couldn't. I stayed with Rachel for almost 3 weeks. Then I found a new place in a different city, ground floor unit. I know all the reasons that seems counterproductive. Ground floor is less secure by every traditional metric. But the thought of being above something I couldn't see, of there being any unaccounted for space below or behind or above me, I couldn't be in a building where I had to wonder. I have been in my current place for going on 3 years. It is a straightforward apartment in a relatively new building. Everything is accounted for. The closet is a simple reach-in with no seams. I have knocked on every wall, more than once. I've done it with my knuckles, systematically, the way I imagine a contractor would, listening for the difference between solid structure and hollow space. I've never found anything, but I still check. I want to tell you one more thing before I end. The night it all came out, after the police, after they had gone, after Marcus had talked to me and Rachel had come and we were sitting in her car in the parking lot at past midnight, Rachel asked me when I first knew something was wrong. I said November. The smell. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's 4 months." And I said, "Yes. I know." 4 months between the first wrong thing and the night I finally left. 4 months of noticing and explaining and dismissing and moving on. 4 months during which a man was folded into a corridor 8 inches from my bedroom. On the other side of a wall I had touched 100 times without knowing what was on the other side of it. I've talked about this in therapy at length. About why I didn't act sooner. About whether there's something I should have done differently. The answer I keep landing on is that I was doing what people do. We make sense of the world by fitting new information into existing patterns. Shoes move because we kicked them. Doors open because of drafts. Sounds come from pipes. We are not built to maintain sustained fear about small anomalies because if we were we'd be paralyzed. But sometimes the anomalies are not small. Sometimes the thing you keep explaining away is exactly what it looks like. I still turn on a lamp when I sleep. Not the overhead. Just a small lamp in the corner. Enough to see by if I wake up. I still check under the bed. I know this is no longer the relevant place to check. I've thought about that more than you might expect. I know that what I should be checking is the walls. The structure. The seams. But checking under the bed is what I do, and so I do it, and it's the thing that makes it possible for me to lie down at night. Accommodation. That's what the therapist called it. A small ritual that acknowledges the anxiety without feeding it. I'm okay. I want to say that. I am a reasonably okay person leading a reasonably okay life. I sleep in my apartment. I cook in my kitchen. I go to work. I call my mother. I see Rachel on weekends when we can manage it. But I think about the corridor. I think about what he could see through those holes. I think about the sleeping bag folded neatly, as if he planned to come back. And I think about the notebook I was never allowed to read, and what exactly was in it, and whether Marcus's decision to not show it to me was the right call or the kindest one. I don't know. I've decided not to push. Some things you decide not to know. If you have had your own experience, something that crept up on you slowly, something you noticed and dismissed and couldn't stop thinking about, send it to the email in the description below. I read everything. I respond to what I can. Yours is not too small and it is not too strange. These are true scary stories. They are real scary stories. Creepy true stories that belong to real people who had no idea, going into an ordinary day, that something was already wrong. The scariest horror narration is never about what jumps out at you. It is about what was already there, quiet and patient, and how long it took you to see it. If something feels wrong tonight, trust that. Stay safe out there. I was 28 years old at the time. I lived alone in a small ranch-style house on the edge of a quiet town in Pennsylvania. The house had 2 bedrooms and 1 bath with a basement I used mostly for storage. I moved in about 6 months earlier after a bad breakup. The rent was cheap and the neighbors mostly kept to themselves, which was fine with me. I worked days at a warehouse loading trucks, so my evenings were usually simple. I would come home, cook something easy, watch some TV, and fall asleep around 11. The place felt normal and comfortable. Nothing strange had ever happened there before. That night started like every other night. I got home from work around 6:30. The sun was already going down and the air felt cold for October. I parked my truck in the driveway and walked inside. I locked the front door behind me out of habit. Then I made spaghetti on the stove with some sauce from a jar. I ate it sitting on the couch in front of the TV while scrolling through my phone. Around 8:30 I took a long hot shower and changed into sweatpants and an old t-shirt. I turned the heat up a notch because the house got chilly at night. I walked through every room and checked the locks. Front door deadbolt on. Back door locked and chained. All the windows in the living room and bedroom pulled shut and latched. Everything felt secure. I turned off most of the lights, leaving just the lamp in the living room on its lowest setting. Then I went to bed. I remember lying there thinking about how ordinary the day had been. Nothing special. Just life. I woke up suddenly around 1:15 in the morning. My eyes opened and I lay there staring at the ceiling. The room was dark except for a little moonlight coming through the curtains. I did not know what woke me. The house was completely quiet. Maybe too quiet, but houses at night are like that. My mouth felt dry, so I decided to get up for a glass of water. I swung my legs out of bed and felt the carpet under my bare feet. The hallway was dark as I walked toward the kitchen. I flipped on the hall light and the bulb buzzed for a second before staying on. In the kitchen, the tile was cold against my skin. I poured water from the tap and drank it slowly, standing at the sink. While I stood there, I noticed the first wrong detail. The back door handle looked slightly off. Not wide open, but not fully closed either. The deadbolt was still turned, but the door itself sat just a fraction out of place. I walked over and tested it. It was unlocked. I clearly remembered locking it before bed. I always did that. I turned the deadbolt again and made sure the chain was fastened tight. Then I checked the front door for good measure. Still locked. I told myself I must have forgotten the back one earlier. It was late. I was tired from work. Mistakes happen. I drank the rest of the water and went back to bed. Sleep did not come easy after that. I kept thinking about the door. My room felt a little stuffy, so I cracked the window about 2 inches for some fresh air. Outside, the neighborhood was silent. No cars passing. No dogs barking. just the wind moving through the trees now and then. After 20 minutes or so, I finally drifted off again. The next time I woke, it was closer to 3 in the morning. This time I heard a sound. A soft creak like a floorboard taking weight in the living room. Old houses make noises, I reminded myself. I lay still under the covers and listened hard. For a long minute there was nothing. My heart picked up a little, but I stayed in bed. I should have left sooner looking back, but at the time it felt stupid to panic over a random sound. I closed my eyes and tried to relax. 15 minutes passed. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. Slow, careful footsteps crossing the living room carpet. They were not loud, but in the dead quiet of the house they carried. They stopped near the hallway entrance. I sat up in bed. My hands felt cold already. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and held it tight. The screen light was too bright and hurt my eyes for a second. I listened. The footsteps started again, moving toward the kitchen. Then silence. I told myself it could be the cat from the neighbor's yard, or settling pipes, or the furnace kicking on. But we did not have a cat, and the pipes never sounded exactly like footsteps. Something was not right. I got out of bed slowly. My legs felt heavy, like they did not want to move. I crept to the bedroom door and opened it just a crack. The hallway looked empty. The living room lamp was still on low, casting long shadows across the floor. I stepped out, keeping my back close to the wall. The carpet felt soft under my feet, but every small creak from my own steps made me freeze. I waited. No other sound came. I moved toward the kitchen, staying quiet. The glass I used earlier was still on the counter right where I left it. Nothing had been touched. I checked the back door again. Still locked and chained. I opened the fridge just to do something normal, and the light inside felt reassuring for a moment. I closed it and stood there breathing. My own breathing sounded loud in the silence. Then I saw the basement door. It was open 2 inches. I always kept that door closed and latched because the stairs were old and steep with no railing on one side. I had not been down there in weeks. Just storing boxes. I stared at the gap. My mouth went dry again. I walked over and pulled it shut. The latch clicked loud in the quiet. I dragged a kitchen chair over and wedged it tight against the door. Looking back, I probably should have called someone right then. But who calls the police at 3 in the morning because a door might have been left open? I felt stupid for letting it get to me. I went back down the hall toward my bedroom. Halfway there, I stopped. There was a smell. Faint but out of place. Like someone had been outside in the cold rain and walked in without wiping their shoes. It hung near the guest room door. I had not been inside that room for days. I pushed the door open and turned on the light. The bed was still made. Closet door closed. Everything looked the same as always. But the window in there was unlocked. I locked it tight. Then I knelt down and looked under the bed. Nothing but dust. I turned the light off and left the room. Back in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the mattress with the phone in my hand. I thought about dialing 911, but what exactly would I say? I heard footsteps and a door was open. They would probably think I was imagining things or had been drinking. I decided to wait until morning. I left my bedroom door open a crack so I could hear better. The house stayed quiet for a long time after that. Almost an hour. I even started to doze off sitting there propped against the headboard. My eyes felt heavy. Then the footsteps came back. Much clearer. They moved down the hallway and stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could hear breathing. Slow and steady. Not mine. My hands started shaking so bad I nearly dropped the phone. I gripped it harder and dialed 911 but did not press call yet. The breathing stayed there just on the other side of the door. I did not move. I barely breathed myself. My chest felt tight and my skin prickled. After what seemed like forever, the footsteps retreated back toward the living room. Soft and deliberate. I waited 5 full minutes before I crept out again. All the lights in the living room were still on low. The lamp looked normal. But on the coffee table sat my spare key. The one I kept hidden in the kitchen drawer for emergencies. I had not touched it in months. It was placed exactly in the center of the table. My chest tightened more. I grabbed the key and shoved it deep in my pocket. Then I went through the entire house, checking every window and every door again. All secure. I opened every closet. Nothing inside but clothes and empty space. I sat on the couch with every light in the house turned on after that. The clock on the wall showed 4:30. I kept staring at the hallway. Every shadow on the wall looked wrong. Every small sound from the furnace clicking on or the fridge humming made my body tense. My hands would not stop shaking. I kept rubbing them on my sweatpants. Around 5:15, I heard a soft click from the kitchen area. The chair I had wedged against the basement door had shifted. Not a lot, but enough for me to see it from the couch. I stood up fast and backed toward the front door. My car keys were already in my hand. I was ready to run outside even if it was still dark. Nothing came up the basement stairs. The house went quiet again. I stayed on that couch watching until the sky started to lighten around 6:30. When it was bright enough outside, I finally went down to the basement. I turned on the light at the top of the stairs. The concrete floor was covered in dust like always. My old moving boxes were stacked against the wall. One of them had been opened. Papers from my old job and some photos were scattered around it. Nothing was missing. Just moved. I searched every corner. The small high window down there was still locked from the inside. No footprints. No other way in or out. I called out of work that day. Said I was sick. The police showed up around 9 when I finally got the nerve to call. They walked through the whole house. Checked doors and windows. Dusted for prints on the spare key and the basement boxes. They found nothing useful. No signs of forced entry anywhere. No footprints in the yard. The officer suggested maybe I had been sleepwalking or stressed from the breakup and forgot things. I knew that was not what happened. I never went back to sleep in that house the same way again. I installed new deadbolts on every door that same afternoon. Added window locks and even bought a couple cheap cameras to set up. For the next week, everything stayed quiet. I came home from work each day and checked every room carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. But the feeling never left me. Like eyes on me when I turned my back. Then one night about 10 days later, I came home from the warehouse around 6:45. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The living room lamp was on. I remembered turning it off before I left for work that morning. I stood there in the doorway with my heart starting to race again. I checked the rest of the house. Back door locked. Windows secure. But the spare key was back on the coffee table. Placed neatly in the center, just like before. I grabbed it, and this time I threw it in the trash outside. That night, I barely slept. I sat up with all the lights on and my phone ready. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the footsteps again. They moved through the living room. Slow. Then they stopped near the hallway. I stayed frozen on the couch. My hands shook holding the phone. The breathing started again. Closer this time. I could smell that same faint outdoor smell. Like cold clothes and sweat. I did not call out. I did not move. After several minutes, the sounds retreated toward the basement area. The next morning, I packed a bag and stayed at a motel for a few nights. When I came back, I found the basement door open again. More papers scattered. One of my old work shirts from a box was laid out on the floor like someone had tried it on. I never found out who it was. The police found nothing. I moved out 2 months later and never went back to that house. I still do not know how they got inside every time or what they wanted from me. Sometimes I wonder if they are still there waiting for the next person. This was a true scary story, and one of those creepy true stories that reminds you how thin the line is between normal and something being very wrong. If you have had an experience of your own with Home Alone horror or night shift horror or any disturbing true stories, please leave it in the comments or send it to the email in the description. I read every single one. And as always, stay safe out there. The story above is expanded with detailed slow pacing, but to reach full length for a 45 to 60 minute narration, I continued building more layers of tension below in the same style. After I moved out, I tried to forget about it. I got a new apartment across town with better locks and brighter lights. For a while it worked. The nightmares came less often. But 6 months later, I was driving home late one night from a friend's place. It was around 1 in the morning. I passed by my old street just out of habit. The house looked the same from the outside. New people had moved in, I heard. I slowed down for a second. Then I saw it. The living room lamp was on low, even though it was very late. I kept driving. I never went back to check. I still do not know who it was or why they chose my house. But I know something was not right and I should have left sooner. To make the full narration reach the requested length, here is the continued slow build with more everyday details and escalating moments. Going back to that original night, I remember the fridge hum sounding louder than usual after I closed it. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time just listening. My bare feet started to get cold on the tile. I rubbed my arms to warm up. The clock on the microwave showed 3:20 now. I thought about making coffee, but that felt pointless. Instead, I walked back to the living room and sat on the couch. I left the TV off because any noise might cover up other sounds. I just sat in the low lamplight staring at the hallway. Every minute felt longer. My eyes kept darting to the basement door. The chair was still there, but I imagined it moving slightly. I blinked and it looked normal again. I rubbed my eyes hard. Around 4 o'clock, I heard a new sound. Not footsteps this time. A soft rustling like papers being moved. It came from the basement. I stood up and walked closer to the kitchen. I put my ear near the basement door. The rustling stopped. Then it started again. Slow and deliberate. Like someone looking through my things one page at a time. My stomach felt tight. I backed away and grabbed a knife from the drawer. Not to use, but just to hold something solid. The handle felt cold in my shaking hand. I waited. The sound continued for several minutes, then stopped completely. I did not open the door. I could not make myself do it. Instead, I went back to the couch and waited for daylight. When the sun finally rose, I felt exhausted but relieved. I called work and then the police. The officers were nice but skeptical. They searched everywhere. One of them even went into the attic crawlspace, though I had forgotten it existed. They found nothing. No fingerprints that did not belong. No broken locks. They suggested I get a security system. I did that the same day. The cameras gave me some peace for a week. I checked the footage every morning. Nothing unusual. Then on the 8th night, the camera in the living room glitched. The timestamp showed 2:45. For 3 full minutes the screen went black. When it came back, the spare key was on the table again. I had thrown the old one away. This was a new spare I bought after moving. I watched the footage 10 times. No one appeared on camera. The key just showed up. I still do not know how. I started sleeping with the lights on and the TV playing low. Every night, I checked the doors multiple times before bed. The feeling of being watched never fully left. One evening I came home and found the TV on a channel I never watch. It was playing an old black and white movie with the volume very low. I unplugged the TV and slept at the motel again. This went on for weeks. Small things kept happening. A drawer left open that I knew I closed. My shoes moved from the front door to the middle of the living room. Once I found a chair pulled out from the kitchen table like someone had been sitting there. I never saw the person, but I knew they were there, watching and waiting. I installed more cameras. Motion lights outside. Nothing stopped it. Eventually, I broke the lease and moved far away to another state. I told the landlord there was a problem with the house, but I did not give details. He looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. But I know what I experienced. It was real. Those true paranormal stories and creepy stories you hear about sometimes are not always made up. This one happened to me. I still check my locks 3 times every night. And I never leave a lamp on when I leave the house. If you are listening to this scary bedtime story late at night, remember to check your doors. You never know what might be waiting in the dark.